He was a Navy SEAL sniper on a mission to eliminate one of the most dangerous terrorists alive. Every move, every breath was trained for precision until he saw her. A little girl standing beside his target, innocent eyes, in the middle of a war. One pull of the trigger could change the world or destroy what was left of his soul. Torn between orders and conscience, faith and fear, he made a choice that no soldier was ever trained for: to spare life where death was commanded. What happened next would test the limits of courage, love, and God's mercy in the heart of war. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. Fog draped over the pine ridges of northern Washington, swallowing the outline of Black Ridge Camp, an abandoned training base now repurposed for covert operations. The silence was heavy enough to make every crack of twig sound like a confession. From a rocky perch overlooking the dense valley, Lieutenant Ethan Walker, U.S. Navy SEAL, lay prone behind his rifle, glassing the clearing below through the long, patient breath of a man who had been here too long. For 3 weeks, Ethan had hunted a ghost. Abdul Karim, a former insurgent commander turned black market arms dealer, rumored to be planning an attack on American soil. The trail led here, into the dark heart of the forest. What disturbed Ethan wasn't the mission, but how quiet it had become. No chatter, no movement, only the wind and the slow pulse in his temples. Rex, his German shepherd and partner through 2 deployments, sat beside him, breathing steady, alert. The dog's ear twitched at every far-off rustle. He wasn't restless. He was listening, the way soldiers do after they've learned silence can mean survival or death. They had been through ambushes, betrayals, and desert storms together. Rex had once dragged Ethan from a burning convoy. Since then, neither had been the same. Through the scope, Ethan tracked the enemy's camp below. Tents fashioned from camo netting, a small generator, crates of munitions. Men moved about, armed, cautious, but then movement caught his eye near the center of camp. A small figure weaving between the men holding a basket. Not a fighter. Too small. Too calm. Ethan adjusted the focus. The figure resolved into a child. A young girl, perhaps 10, with dark hair tied loosely behind her head. She passed food to the men and stopped beside a tall, bearded man hunched over a map table. The man's hand rested on her shoulder, protective, paternal. Ethan's gut turned cold. That was Abdul Karim, and that was his daughter. He blinked, lowering the rifle slightly as if the glass had betrayed him. What was she doing here? No intel report mentioned a child. The logic of war told him she was collateral, a liability, a shield. But something in her small, unguarded movement shattered the black and white lines he'd drawn in his mind. She wasn't a part of this. Not really. He steadied his breath, lifted the rifle again. Abdul pointed at something on the map, his voice too faint to carry. The girl nodded, listening as if she understood. Ethan realized he was holding his breath, the same way he had years ago when he stood over the body of his own father, a man who'd taught him to shoot, to fight, and to never turn away from duty. His father had believed in orders. Ethan had believed in him. But after watching his father's war destroy their family, Ethan had sworn to fight differently, to never lose his humanity, no matter how deep the mission went. Now, with his finger grazing the trigger, that promise trembled. "Target in sight," came the whisper in his earpiece. "Confirm visual." He didn't respond. Through the scope, he saw Abdul rise, stepping away from the table. The girl followed. They moved toward a vehicle at the edge of camp. The distance was perfect for a clean shot. One bullet and it would be over. But she was still there, right beside him. Ethan's pulse thudded in his ears. The rules of engagement were clear, but the weight behind them wasn't. The girl looked up at her father, smiled faintly. That single, ordinary smile made Ethan's stomach twist. It was too human for the Crosshairs to rest on. Rex shifted beside him, sensing the hesitation, letting out a low, uneasy growl. Ethan whispered, "Easy, buddy." He should have pulled the trigger. That's what the mission demanded. But the mission didn't see what he saw. It didn't feel what he felt. His finger froze. The girl stepped away for a moment, chasing a piece of paper caught by the wind. Perhaps a note, a drawing, something trivial in a place that devoured innocence. Abdul followed, laughing softly as he caught it. Ethan exhaled, and for a heartbeat, he wasn't a soldier. He was a man watching a father and daughter in the twilight of a dying forest. He thought of his father's last words. "One day, you'll learn that killing and saving aren't opposites. They're brothers who live in the same house." The radio crackled again. "Walker, do you copy? Take the shot." He looked once more through the scope. Abdul was framed perfectly in the reticle, but the girl was there again, standing in front of him, eyes wide, unafraid. She looked directly into the forest, directly toward Ethan, though she couldn't possibly see him. It felt like she did. He lowered the rifle. "Negative," he whispered into the mic. "No clear shot." "Walker, repeat." "Obstructed view, awaiting movement." He cut the transmission and switched off his comm. The silence afterward felt like judgment. Rex rested his head on Ethan's boot. Calm again. Ethan knew he'd just broken protocol. He also knew something else. The moment he saw that girl, the mission had changed. It wasn't about orders anymore. It was about conscience. As the forest deepened into dusk, Ethan stayed motionless, his rifle idle across his knees. Down below, the enemy camp quieted, the girls' laughter fading into the night. He watched until even the firelight vanished, until all that was left was the hollow sound of its breath. He scribbled a single line into his mission log before packing up. Target accompanied by minor. Daughter. Situation requires re-evaluation. And as he slung his rifle over his shoulder, a storm gathered somewhere behind his ribs, the kind that didn't pass with weather, but with choice. Night spread through the forest like a tide swallowing the last traces of sunlight. Ethan Walker lay awake against the cold earth, his rifle beside him. Rex curled silently nearby. The campfire below had dwindled to embers, but Abdul Karim's men were restless, their silhouettes shifting like ghosts among the trees. The girl, Lena, was nowhere in sight. Ethan's mind refused to rest. He had made a choice, not to fire, not to follow orders. And now, every passing hour deepened the weight of that decision. Command expected confirmation by dawn. If he failed to report, they would send another unit, and another sniper might not hesitate. A faint sound broke through the wind, a voice, soft, uncertain. Ethan raised his binoculars. Near the camp's edge, Lena stood by herself, looking toward the forest, as if searching for something she couldn't name. In her hand, she clutched a small cloth bundle. Abdul's voice barked from inside a tent, harsh and commanding. Lena flinched, then turned back toward the trees. The look in her eyes, fear mixed with curiosity, sent an ache through Ethan he couldn't explain. He wondered if she sensed someone was watching. He lowered the binoculars, breathing through the doubt pressing against his ribs. Rex shifted his weight and looked up at him, silent but questioning. The dog had learned to read him better than most humans. Once, in Afghanistan, Rex had refused to advance during a mission. Moments later, an IED exploded where they would have walked. Since then, Ethan had learned that instinct could be as precise as training. And tonight, Rex's quiet stare carried that same message. Something isn't right. Through the trees, the generator below flickered out. Darkness swallowed the camp entirely. A truck engine coughed, then died. Panic rippled through the men. Orders shouted in Arabic. Ethan's earpiece hissed back to life. Command was calling. "Walker, status. Why haven't we received confirmation?" He hesitated before replying. Still observing. Unclear activity. Possible civilian presence. The voice on the other end hardened. "We're not here for civilians. You know your target?" The transmission cut. Ethan's pulse quickened. The forest seemed to lean closer, listening. In the distance, he saw two men dragging crates toward a cave entrance at the far side of camp. A third followed with a metal case. Not weapons, Ethan guessed, but detonators. This was bigger than an arms deal. It was preparation. A strike was coming soon, maybe hours, but the girl, she didn't fit into the picture. Why would a man like Abdul bring his daughter into a war zone unless she was all he had left? Lightning flared somewhere beyond the ridge, followed by the low growl of thunder. Rain would come soon, a curse for the mission, but a gift for escape. He needed confirmation before he could act. Slipping on his night vision goggles, Ethan crawled down slope, Rex following in quiet rhythm. The forest smelled of wet bark and cordite, memory and menace. Halfway down, he froze. Ahead, a faint glow moved through the trees, not from the camp, but higher, closer to his position. Someone else was out there. He gestured for Rex to stay. The light bobbed once, twice, then steadied. A whisper carried on the wind. English, not Arabic. "Stay low. He's close." Ethan's chest tightened. Another team. He hadn't been told anyone else was deployed. He ducked behind a fallen log, adjusting the scope. Through the faint mist, he caught sight of two men in tactical gear, no insignia, faces masked. Their movements were deliberate, their weapons American. They weren't here to assist him. They were hunting him. Rex let out a low growl, the kind that came from deep instinct. Ethan put a hand on the dog's neck, calming him, but his mind was already racing. If command had sent them, it meant he was compromised or expendable. He remembered the last transmission, the impatience in that voice. Maybe they didn't trust his hesitation. Maybe they had decided to finish what he wouldn't. He crawled back toward higher ground, careful not to break a twig. The wind carried the men's voices closer. "He's up there," one said. "Orders are clean. We make it look like Crossfire." Ethan clenched his jaw. The mission had changed again, and now he was part of the target list. Down below, Abdul's men shouted. More engines roaring to life, headlights cutting through the storm that had begun to fall. Thunder rolled across the ridge, masking movement. Ethan seized the moment, signaling Rex forward. They reached a rocky outcrop overlooking the camp just as rain started hammering the canopy. In the chaos below, Abdul emerged, dragging Lena toward one of the trucks. She resisted, shouting something Ethan couldn't hear. Abdul struck her once across the face. Ethan's finger twitched near the trigger, rage flaring, not as a soldier, but as a man. He steadied himself. Emotion in combat was poison, but still he watched, unable to look away. The masked operatives reached the lower ridge, rifles trained on the same target. Ethan understood now. Their orders weren't to eliminate him or Abdul alone. They wanted to erase the entire scene, wipe every trace. A cover-up. His comm crackled again with a single word. Cleanse. Ethan felt a familiar sickness rise, the same feeling he'd had years ago when an op went wrong and civilians paid the price. The brass had called it collateral correction. He'd called it betrayal. He turned to Rex. "We're done following ghosts," he whispered. "We move now." The dog's eyes met his, steady and knowing. Together they descended through the storm, wind howling around them. Below, Abdul shoved Lena into a truck. The masked men raised their rifles. Ethan lifted his scope, aligning on the nearest shooter. The rain distorted his vision, but he didn't need clarity. He needed conviction. The shot cracked through the thunder, and one of the masked men dropped. Chaos erupted. Abdul screamed orders. Bullets sprayed wild. Rex bolted ahead, vanishing into smoke and rain. Ethan fired again, covering his approach, but through the confusion, he caught one last glimpse that froze him. Lena had broken free and was running, not toward the trees, not toward safety, but straight toward him. He shouted, "Stop!" But his voice vanished in the storm. The chapter ends with her stumbling toward his direction as gunfire stitched through the darkness. A collision of two fates neither could escape. The dawn came slow and gray, spreading across the forest like smoke, seeping through old wounds. Ethan Walker hadn't slept. He lay flat on his belly, the rifle steady against his shoulder, watching the camp below stirred alive. Abdul Karim's men moved in hushed routine, lighting small fires, checking crates, scanning the perimeter. The girl, Lena, was awake too, sitting near her father with a blanket draped around her shoulders. The sight had a strange calmness to it, almost domestic, as though the violence of the world could not reach this one fragile circle of light in the trees. Ethan's earpiece cracked softly, and the calm shattered. "Walker," came the voice of command, flat and mechanical. "Target confirmed. You are clear to engage. Distance 850 meters. Wind negligible. Take the shot." He didn't answer. His finger brushed the trigger guard, an old reflex. His breath slowed, his heartbeat counting the seconds between orders and obedience. "Walker, confirm," Static hissed. "Do you copy?" Ethan's lips parted. "Copy." He exhaled, the single word carrying more weight than he could bear. The rifle scope framed Abdul perfectly, center mass, still unaware. One clean squeeze, and the mission would end. One bullet through the chest, and a dozen future attacks might die with him. Logic whispered, "Do it." Duty echoed, "Now." But reason has its limits. Humanity does not. He steadied the rifle. Through the magnified glass, Abdul's expression shifted. Lena had approached, clutching something small in her hands. A piece of bread, rough and stale. She pressed it toward her father, smiling faintly. He took it, broke it in half, and gave the rest back to her. Then, against all that Ethan had imagined of him, Abdul laughed. It was soft, low, human. Ethan froze. In that instant, the crosshairs hovered not over a target, but over a man. Not a killer, not a name on a list, just a father sharing his breakfast with the only person left in his world. A tremor passed through Ethan's hands. He adjusted his breathing, refocused. The training demanded it. Distance, precision, elimination. But another voice, quieter and older, rose within him, the voice of his father carried from memory like smoke over water. When you pull the trigger, son, make sure it's your heart that decides, not your orders. His throat tightened. His father had said those words the night before deployment, long ago, after a funeral Ethan had been too young to understand. It was a rule his father had never followed, and one that had cost him everything. Ethan had sworn to be different. He blinked through the scope again. Abdul leaned closer to his daughter, speaking softly. The girl laughed, crumbs on her lips. The sound of it, faint as it was, struck Ethan harder than any explosion. It was the sound of something still pure, something war hadn't killed yet. He lowered the rifle slightly, then raised it again. His breath shook. Rex shifted beside him, sensing the hesitation. The dog let out a low whine, head cocked. Ethan whispered, "I know, boy, I know." He had pulled triggers in deserts, jungles, and cities. He had ended lives to save others, and he had never once questioned it. But now, staring down the barrel at a father and his child, he understood that some acts couldn't be justified by outcomes. He whispered into his mic, "Command, the girl's still with him." A pause. Then, "Collateral acknowledged. Proceed." The word, collateral, hit him like a slap. He exhaled through clenched teeth. "Negative, not a clear shot." "Walker, do not stall. Confirm elimination." Ethan steadied his aim once more. Abdul's head bent slightly as he spoke to Lena. A strand of her dark hair caught the sunlight. His finger began to tense, just enough for the trigger to feel alive beneath it. Then she looked up, not at her father, not at the fire, but toward the forest, toward him. For a moment, her gaze met his through the glass, though she couldn't possibly see him. Still, Ethan felt the weight of it, the innocence staring straight through all his camouflage, his purpose, his duty. He couldn't breathe. "Walker, respond!" He swallowed hard, voice barely a whisper. Not possible. "Repeat?" He closed his eyes. No shot. Silence filled the calm. Then came the final warning, cold and merciless. "If you cannot complete the mission, someone else will. You have 1 minute to comply." The transmission ended. Ethan stared at the scope again, but the decision had already been made. He lifted his finger off the trigger, safety clicking back into place. His heartbeat slowed, not from calm, but from the dull ache of defiance. He knew what it meant to refuse an order. The reports, the hearings, the doubt. But this time, he couldn't lie to himself. Killing a man in front of his daughter would not make the world safer. It would only make him less human. He whispered to Rex, "We're done here." The dog's ears flicked, a silent understanding between the soldiers who didn't need words. Ethan switched off his radio and packed the rifle, movement slow and deliberate. His mind was heavy, his chest hollow. He had crossed an invisible line tonight, one that no metal could mend. He looked down one last time. Abdul was standing now, holding Lena close as she pointed toward the tree line, perhaps curious about the world beyond their hiding place. Ethan thought, not for the first time, how strange it was that the same forest could hold both hunter and hunted, both sin and grace. He whispered again to no one in particular, "Forgive me." And as he crawled back from the ridge, the faintest echo of his father's voice lingered in the rain-soaked wind. "You can disobey orders, Ethan. Just don't disobey your soul." But far below, unseen by either of them, a small red light blinked once among the shadows. A signal light from another scope. already watching. The same target. The mission wasn't over. Someone else had just taken the shot. The night began without stars, thick with the kind of darkness that hides intent. A cold wind pushed through the forest, whispering across leaves slick with dew. Ethan Walker moved through it like a shadow, every step calculated, every breath steady. Rex trotted beside him, ears tilted forward, his movements soundless but alert. Ahead, through the veil of mist and pine, the faint metallic rattle of engines broke the stillness. Abdul Karim's camp was moving. Through the scope of his night vision goggles, Ethan saw them. Men scrambling to load crates into old trucks, rifles slung across their shoulders, voices sharp and hurried. Abdul barked orders, his right hand clutching a radio, the other gripping his daughter's arm. Lena stumbled as he pulled her forward, the fear in her steps plain even through the green haze of the lens. She didn't cry. She just followed, obedient but trembling. Ethan's stomach turned. The mission he had refused yesterday had found him again tonight, cruelly inevitable. He whispered, "They're packing explosives." Rex gave a low growl, confirming what Ethan already knew. The scent of diesel and ammonium nitrate filled the air. If those trucks left the valley, the next explosion wouldn't just burn trees, it would burn people. He raised his comm. "Command, this is Walker, confirming enemy movement. They're carrying munitions, multiple crates. Target has a civilian with him. I repeat, the child is still present." The line hissed back static. Then a voice, "Engage if necessary, collateral acceptable." Ethan froze. The words hung in his ear like poison. Collateral acceptable. It meant Lena's life was negotiable. It meant she was already written off. He switched the radio off. "Not tonight," he murmured, tightening his grip on the rifle. "No more ghosts." Rex's gaze flicked toward him, loyal and ready. The dog understood what came next. They would act alone. Ethan moved down the slope, careful not to break silhouette. The air trembled with the hum of generators and human panic. He was 30 meters from the outer tent when a shout went up. One of Abdul's guards had spotted movement. A flare burst into the sky, flooding the trees in red. "Contact!" Gunfire erupted, wild and uncoordinated. Ethan hit the ground, rolled behind a fallen log, and fired a short burst. One man dropped, another screamed. The camp descended into chaos. Abdul shouted something in Arabic, dragging Lena toward a corrugated metal building at the far end, the old fuel storage depot. Ethan knew what was inside. Hundreds of gallons of diesel, dry barrels and detonators. The perfect place to end everything. He sprinted through the storm of bullets, Rex weaving beside him, moving like instinct incarnate. Sparks rained down from a ruptured generator. The air reeked of oil and blood. As Ethan neared the depot, he saw Abdul through the haze, cornered but defiant, holding a trigger detonator in one hand, a RA pistol in the other. His face gleamed with sweat and conviction. "Stop!" Ethan shouted, stepping into view, rifle raised. Abdul turned, his voice hoarse but steady. "You're too late, soldier. You came to kill a monster, but all you'll see die is a father." He pulled Lena in front of him, his hand clutching her shoulder like a shield. She whimpered softly, eyes darting between them. "Let her go," Ethan said, his tone low, deliberate. "You don't have to do this." Abdul laughed bitterly. "Don't I? My people will remember this night. My daughter will remember her father's sacrifice." Lena shook her head, tears catching the firelight. "Baba, please." The sound of her voice cracked something deep inside Ethan. He lowered his rifle slightly, breath trembling. You can still end this another way. Abdul's thumb tightened on the detonator. There is no other way. Then came the smallest motion. Rex, silent as smoke, circling behind through the debris. Ethan's eyes flicked toward the dog, then back to Abdul. Timing was everything now. "Abdul," Ethan said quietly, "you said your daughter will remember you. What do you want her to remember, the blast or the mercy?" For an instant, Abdul hesitated. His eyes softened, just enough for Ethan to see the man beneath the fanatic. Then his face hardened again. "Mercy is for those who live. I am already dead." He raised the trigger. Ethan fired. The shot cracked through the roar of the storm. Abdul staggered back, blood blooming from his shoulder. The detonator slipped from his grasp, but not before his thumb pressed it halfway. Rex lunged. He slammed into Ethan, forcing him to the ground just as the explosion ignited. The world became fire. A shock wave tore through the clearing, ripping tents from the ground, hurling debris skyward. The fuel depot erupted into a tower of flame that swallowed the night. The forest convulsed, trees bowing under the pressure of the blast. For a few terrible seconds, there was no up or down, only heat and thunder and the taste of ash. When Ethan opened his eyes, he was half buried under splintered wood. His ears rang, his body numb. Smoke crawled through the ruins, thick and choking. "Rex," he croaked, pushing himself upright. The dog appeared through the haze, limping but alive. His fur was scorched, eyes wide with the raw will to survive. Ethan staggered toward the remnants of the depot. The air shimmered with heat, the ground glowing in patches where fire still clung. Amid the ruin, a shape moved, small, fragile. Lena. She lay beside her father's body, unmoving at first, then stirring weakly. Ethan ran, sliding to his knees beside her. Her face was pale, smudged with soot, but her pulse fluttered under his fingers. Alive. Abdul's eyes were open, unseeing. The detonator burned into the ground near his hand. His final expression was neither rage nor triumph, only the quiet confusion of a man who had lost everything. Ethan lifted Lena carefully into his arms. Her body was limp, but breathing. The air around them shimmered with fallen embers, each one a small dying sun. He whispered, "You're safe now," though he wasn't sure if it was true. The camp was gone, the mission in ashes. Rex limped closer, pressing against Ethan's side. In the distance, thunder rolled again, but it wasn't the storm. It was the sound of aircraft, American, coming late to a battle already finished. Ethan looked up through the smoke, his eyes burning. The flames painted the sky red, the color of victory or guilt or both. Somewhere behind him, the wind shifted, carrying with it a faint echo of Abdul's last words. "My daughter will see what I died for." Ethan held Lena tighter. "No," he whispered, "she'll see something else." The forest crackled around them, alive with ruin, and as the rescue lights approached, Ethan realized the mission was over. But the consequences had only just begun. The night bled slowly into dawn, smoke hanging heavy over the ravaged forest. Ash drifted through the air like snow, settling on the blackened earth where the camp once stood. Ethan Walker ran through the wreckage, cradling Lena against his chest, her breath faint and uneven. Behind him, Rex followed, limping through the mud and cinders, the loyal rhythm of his steps steady despite the pain. The world burned around them, but Ethan's focus narrowed to a single truth. She was still alive. He found the medic outpost at the ridge, a temporary station set up for the recon unit. The corpsman, A young man whose face hadn't yet learned what horror meant looked up in shock as Ethan staggered in with the child. "She needs oxygen," Ethan rasped, voice raw from the smoke. The medic hesitated. "Is she—" "Civilian," Ethan cut him off. "She's just a child." They laid her on a stretcher. The medic fitted a mask over her face, checking for burns and fractures. Ethan stood back, his hands trembling, eyes fixed on the rise and fall of her chest. For the first time in years, he prayed, not to win, not to survive, but just for the girl to open her eyes. Minutes passed. Then her fingers twitched, her eyelids fluttered open, confusion swimming behind the soot, and tears. She blinked against the light, trying to focus on the man standing beside her. "You?" Her voice came out a whisper, thin and broken. "You killed my father, didn't you?" Ethan froze. The question cut clean through him, more than any bullet ever could. He wanted to speak, to deny, to explain, to find words that could ease what she carried. But there was no lie kind enough to heal that truth. He swallowed hard. "Your father," he said quietly, "made a choice. I just made another one." Lena's eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. She turned her face away, pulling the blanket up to her chin. The silence between them grew, sharp and endless. Ethan wanted to tell her he was sorry, that he had seen the man in her father's eyes before he pulled the trigger, but soldiers didn't get to apologize, not for doing what they were ordered to, and certainly not for what they refused to. Rex came to stand beside him, muzzle nudging his knee, grounding him back into the present. The medics worked in silence, patching wounds, cataloging the fallen. Somewhere outside, the rain began again, a slow, steady drizzle that turned the ashes into gray mud. A voice crackled through Ethan's comm. "Walker, report status." He hesitated, staring at the sleeping child. Then he pressed the button. "Target neutralized," he said, his tone even, hollow. "One civilian recovered. Female. Alive." "Copy that," the voice replied. "Extraction inbound." He closed the comm. Extraction. A clean word for a filthy truth. He looked around. The forest, the smoke, the faint outline of bodies beneath tarps. All of it fading into the gray. There was no victory here, only survival. As the rain thickened, Ethan walked outside the tent. The scent of burned fuel mixed with pine, a strange reminder of life among death. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his field notebook. The paper was damp, the ink bleeding at the corners, but he wrote anyway. "Mission complete. Target terminated. One child survivor. Recommend transfer to humanitarian care. Personal note. Not all rescues come from bullets." He closed the notebook and slipped it back into his jacket. When he turned, Lena was standing in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket far too large for her. Her eyes were red, but steady now. She said nothing. Neither did he. Between them stood an invisible truth neither could touch, her father's death and his guilt, two halves of the same wound. Finally she spoke. "He wasn't a good man, but he was my father." Ethan nodded. "And that's enough." She looked down. "Will I have to go with your people now?" "Yes," he said gently. "They'll take care of you." She hesitated, then asked the question he feared most. "And you?" Ethan glanced at the smoking tree line. "I go back." "To where?" He looked at her, really looked, the same way his father had looked at him once before leaving for a war that never ended. "To the place soldiers always go," he said softly. "Wherever the next order comes from." Her lip trembled, but she didn't cry. She turned and walked back inside the tent. Rex watched her leave, then looked up at Ethan with quiet eyes that seemed to understand what he couldn't say aloud. Later, when the transport helicopter arrived, Ethan filed his report. "Objective secured," he told the pilot. "Let's go home?" As the helicopter lifted, he gazed out at the valley below. The forest was still burning in places, small flames flickering through the mist. The smoke curled upward like the souls of the dead rising toward an indifferent sky. He reached down to pat Rex's head, the warmth of the dog's fur grounding him. "We did what we could," he whispered. "That has to be enough." But deep down, he knew it never would be. When they landed at the forward base hours later, Ethan submitted his report. It was short, clinical, and dishonest in all the ways that made it acceptable. Target eliminated, civilian miner rescued, operation concluded successfully. He signed his name, then paused. At the bottom, in handwriting too small for anyone else to notice, he added a final line. "The mission did not end with the explosion. It ended when I chose compassion." Outside, the morning fog rolled in over the mountains. Ethan tightened his grip on Rex's leash and began walking toward the barracks. His boots sank into the wet earth, each step echoing the weight he carried. Somewhere behind him, Lena would wake to a world without her father. Somewhere ahead, Command would read his report and see only numbers and objectives. But in the narrow space between those two worlds, Ethan had found something he didn't expect. The faint, stubborn heartbeat of his own humanity. He lifted his gaze toward the pale Washington sky. The mist hung heavy, but for the first time he didn't see war in it. He saw mercy, and that, he thought, was enough to keep walking. In the ashes of battle, Ethan discovered something greater than victory, the quiet miracle of mercy. When he chose compassion over command, he didn't just save a child, he saved what was left of his own soul. And maybe that's what God's grace truly looks like. Not thunder from the heavens, but a whisper in the heart, reminding us that love is stronger than fear, and forgiveness is stronger than hate. In life, we are all soldiers in our own battles against anger, pride, or loss. Yet, in every act of kindness, every moment we choose empathy over judgment, we bring light into the darkness. That is the small miracle God places within us all. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment about how faith has guided you through your hardest days. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, redemption, and grace. May God bless you, protect your family, and keep your heart strong. For even in the darkest war, His light never fades.